Welcome back to another episode of Survival Worldwide on Reality Pop. I'm your host, Chris Swanepoel, and with me today, as always, is my co-host, Riley. Riley, how's things on your end?
Yeah, doing really well, Chris. And another massive week of Australian Survivor, 3 great episodes, and a couple of blindsides thrown in there. I'm still surprised that George is around. He's managing to stick around, obviously creating a big blindside this last episode. So really excited to
Yeah.
discuss all this. And it looks like George is, really subverting expectations at the moment. He's still going.
Yeah, he was quite. I think I feel a bit justified in selecting him in my team earlier in the season when you were giving me grief for it. I know you've moved on from the early opinions you had of George going into the preseason. It's really hard to know how well someone's going to do until they actually get out there and they start playing the game. But I think one of the things that surprised me more than even George still being in the show is the fact that we had one tribal council where an idol wasn't played this week. How surprising was that?
Yeah, crazy to see. I mean, this season we've seen so many idols and advantages throughout that, it was crazy not seeing idol play because it's almost become verbatim in every tribal council. I mean, the first tribal council we had an idol, second tribal council we had another idol, the secret idol, and this tribal council, Kara made the right move and didn't end up playing the idol, which worked out well, and they got a feather in their cap for the next tribal council.
Yeah, it's really funny, and we'll definitely get into that. George was really trying to put pressure on Kara to play the idol on him in a not so threatening way, but I mean, if she played the idol there, it would have been a complete wrong move for her, knowing that George was probably going to cop all the votes if it were going to come their way in the game. One of the things for me, I think that is interesting watching this season as a fan, is looking at this and thinking to myself, where's Australian Survivor going? What trajectory is it on going into the next season? Obviously, they had All-Stars. There was a very predictable post-merge phase of the game. And I feel like the producers this season came into it thinking, we don't want what happened in All-Stars to happen in Brains versus Brawn this season. We want to keep mixing things up. We want to throw different things at them there. We get another challenge here as well in the early stages where, we've got 5 people that are going to be immune and only 4 people are actually going to be potentially eligible to go home in a vote as well. So they're constantly throwing things at people here. Do you think All-Stars, we're getting a little bit of the after effect? They were happy with Dave being a winner in All-Stars because he was such a great dominant winner, but they also saw it as very boring and predictable in the sense that, let's be honest, most of the exciting things, even in All-Stars, happened before the merge, not after.
Yeah, I certainly think they're keeping everyone on their toes with all these idols and advantages being thrown into the game, keeping players like George and Emmett around for the long run, and creating, great blindsides like what happened with Simon earlier in the season. So look, while we're having a lot of idols, I think it is keeping it entertaining, and we're always going into tribal council, not knowing who's going to go home. And for me, I found, at the merge, I thought it would be a very clear shot. Hayley, Baden, and Flick would just run the game. But every tribal council has been a different story. I mean, this week we had Gerald go home, then it was Laura, then it was Emmett. 3 blindsides that no one was expecting at all. So we're really being kept on our toes this season, which is great to see as a fan.
No, 100%. Also, welcome back to the live stream, Jenny. It's always great to have you here. Jenny says that Way has had such a crap edit this, season, and I have to agree. I mean, Way towards the end of these 3 episodes, she's like a vital cog in the wheel when it comes to George surviving this round and, George working with Way and Hayley to vote against Emmett here, taking Emmett out. But, I've heard the excuses this week that some of the production team have said, or there's rumors out there that people know production, if they do or if they don't, we don't know. But in any case, they're like, it's just there weren't that many players this season that was good at confessionals or good at articulating their game, and because of that, that's the excuse that's being used. They've limited it to only a few people really sort of narrating the season to us and telling us what's happening out there. But we saw a bit of Way in the early season, and she seemed to be pretty good at that. So, I really want to hear from her again. Why do you think Way is just disappearing here at the moment in the edit? I know you probably don't have the answers, but we can only speculate as to why Way's not getting more screen time. And she's a minority on this season. Australian survivors should look at this and say, I don't like to go on about the social justice things too much because sometimes I feel like it can go overboard. But in this case, she's a great representation of a minority playing this game, and her voice is not being heard. We don't know what she's thinking in the game. What do you think is going on here? Because to me, I want to hear more from Way personally.
Yeah, we do see it every season though, with the likes of Simon Black or even Monica Radulovic or Commando Steve Willis. We do always see these purple edits on Australian Survivor more so than US Survivor, despite having 24 episodes being an hour long each to explore these characters. We don't see them as much. I think it has become pretty clear though that this season is centered around Hayley, George. Well, now that Emmett's gone, I'd say Danny is probably the number 3 that we're really getting a lot of content from her as well. And I certainly do hope we get more from Way. But again, similarly, Andrew and Kara, we're not seeing too much from them either. Kara got a little bit more content this week now that she was on the chopping block. But we're really not getting to see too much of these characters. Gerald, another example, a great character that merged in the pre-merge. But once it hit the merge, we didn't see anything from him at all. And he went away very quietly in a shocking fashion. So it's not ideal that we're not seeing and getting to know these players really well. But I think that's just the nature of how Australian Survivor has been edited in the past. We're getting these over-the-top edits and these players who are going completely under the radar. I hope it does pick up in the next week. So I really do like Way. And at the moment, I think she's in a great position. And certainly, we've seen her get high praise from the jury in those Jury Villa episodes. So it's, a little bit odd to me that we're not seeing as much of her game. I do wonder, though, whether that's something to do with, potentially she's not going to be one of the ones that go too much further in the game.
Or she makes it to the final 3 or final 2 and doesn't get any votes. Like, I don't see a sort of a scenario at the moment where Way goes home. Like, I mean, who's going to vote Way out at this point? She's not a physical threat. Yes, she's smart, but again, this is another thing we can talk about. We look at the challenges throughout this week and the things that have been happening. It's all physical challenges. It's run up a hill. It's endurance. It's not let's do a puzzle. It's a brain versus brawn season. We know Australian survivors always going to favor physical type of challenges out there, and that's always going to be the core to what Australian Survivor does. But in a season where you've got brains versus brawns, brains being one of the 2 tribes, you would imagine they would do a little bit more brains sort of challenges out there as well to even the playing field. And I know there's a couple of brains that are also very much undercover brawns out there that can still do really well at the brawn challenges. But I do feel like Australian Survivor kind of thought, oh, that looks like a cool topic to use, but they didn't really fully think it through in regards to how it was going to play out and how they'll make the challenges different to actually fit the theme of the season that they were doing out there. Another thing I also wanted to touch on was you mentioned that, with someone like Way not getting a big edit, that's kind of course for par when it comes to Australian Survivor. Certain players get bigger edits than other players, and that's always the case. But if we get backtracking a couple of seasons ago, my favorite season was Champions versus Contenders 2. Really enjoyed that season. After the merge, we had Harry, we had Luke, we had David. He did go pretty early, but you still had Janine, you had Abby. There was a bunch of players where at one point, even after the merge, you were still thinking, who of these players are going to win the game? Who's actually going to go all the way, And if you were very smart, you could pick up on subtle things with PR and the way that they edited her, where you might have said she's got a good shot. But I feel like there were more players potentially that you thought could still go all the way. For me, the way it's been edited this season, the majority of the players that we're following, like you quite rightfully said, I think it's like, I really think, and listen, guys, everybody that's listening to this live, I could be completely wrong. I don't want to get people's hopes up if you're still hoping for that Hayley win. But for me, I feel like I picked the Hayley win week 1. I was 1 week where I didn't think she was going to win because we got no content from her. But then since then, I have not moved on Hayley. She's got the best edit, throughout the whole season, with George pretty close there. But George is just the guy you're thinking to yourself, how does he get to the end and win this? I mean, if he gets there and he wins it, hats off to him. He's played a phenomenal game. He's made moves this season and he's worked hard, probably harder than anyone else, to actually be able to pull off the things that he's pulled off. But I also wonder, with the way that things are going at the moment, Riley, if George even gets to the end, does he get the respect even from the jury? Do people actually like him? Or is he going to be a Russell Hantz type of character that goes to the end, but he's antagonized a lot of players and he won't get the vote at the end there?
Yeah, and again, it all depends on how the jury are at Final Tribal Council, whether they are bitter towards George. At this stage, I think George is probably playing the best game. And if he goes to Tribal Council against anyone, I think he'd beat them. Even Hayley, who again, she's in my winner pick since the preseason. But, George is playing a very strong game. He's been on the bottom from basically day 2 at this point. And, somehow he's still managing to climb off the bottom, despite being the cockroach. It's on the bottom of everyone's shoes. He's finding a way to survive, which is great to see. And whether he does get that resentment from the jury, The question is still out there, but certainly it's going to be a long 2 weeks toward the end for George to see if he gets there, because time and time again, his name is coming up at Tribal Council. So too with Kara. And those two are very clearly the biggest threats in the game right now. And we saw they were on the chopping block at this last vote before Hayley and Wei obviously flipped their vote to get rid of Emmett, one of the bigger players in the game. But now that Emmett's gone, that massive physical immunity threat is out of the game. I think George is, his target is going to be even more exacerbated now.
Ben Farley, welcome to the live stream, my friend. I'd love to hear more from Wei as well. We agree with you. Dale has said here, what's weird about Wei is that the last three people, Gerald, Laura, Emmett, gave nothing but praise and respect to Wei. So she's clearly a threat of some sort when it comes to the social game. But I'm wondering if people are going to get to the end and say, yes, she was nice socially, but she didn't really pull any moves. She didn't really control the direction of the game. Let's talk about the two people that we think are probably going to win this game. And listen, if there's a left field winner that's going to come from somewhere, hats off. Like we've seen it happen before with some players when it comes to International Survivor, where we never thought they'd win the game and they come from left field and they win the show. But I really feel like it's between Hayley and George, with Hayley probably being the person that is in the driver's seat to win this season. And let's talk about her coming back into the game, because a lot of people are going to hold, if she wins this season, are going to hold the fact against her that she was voted out, she came back and then won the season. And, you kind of have to put her in a category of her own against Chris Underwood and Vanessa Marawa from South African Survivors Season 1, who are players that were voted out of the game and came back and won the show. When you look at Hayley this week and you look at the work she does here when she comes back from Redemption Rock, what did you think about it? Because from my perspective, I was really impressed, because, just the fact that you get a second life in the game doesn't automatically mean you're going to get to the end and win the show. And there's still a lot of people for her to get past. What did you think about the work she did this week?
Yeah, she did a great job to come straight back and immediately reconcile with George and Kara. And really, she was one of the key votes on, two of the tribal councils there. Kara was the only vote at that second tribal council in the middle where Laura went home. But certainly, Hayley has done a good job to position herself back into the tribe. She's, seamlessly fit back in with the Brains tribe while not really alienating her relationship with Flick. And that's something I could see happening next week. Is she links back up with Flick now that Emmett's gone out of the game. Flick and Danny are probably going to be loose stragglers, and potentially she teams up with them, creates an all-girls alliance of sort alongside Andrew and puts that target on George and Kara again. But I think what worked in her benefit was that, she was obviously voted out and created a lot of drama, but the drama backlashed against George as well. So George is still clearly public enemy number one on the Brains tribe, and she's managed to deflect that target off herself and back onto him. So I think George's target is really, really increasing day by day now. That, she's done a great job to seamlessly work her way back into the tribe and figure out what the best move was for her. And I think hats off to her for, pulling off that Emmett move alongside Wei to get rid of Emmett, the biggest physical threat in the game, and someone she didn't feel she could go far in the game with. I think that's a great move for her. And she can really pick up those loose alliance members now and use that to her advantage to build an army to reach the end.
George really thought it would be a good move for her as well. He really sold her on that idea, which always, made me laugh a little bit, because I was thinking to myself, she probably knows he's manipulating her in that scenario, saying, hey, this is your tick at the end that you can take. But then again, if she does vote George out before the end and she gets to the end without him, he can't claim that move. He can't claim that he kind of manipulated her into making the move, So her plan, I think, and I think where she probably will be crowned the queen of the season, is if she gets George before he gets her, and before they go to that final. I think somewhere down the line, both these two players are not going to sit at the end. I very much doubt they both make it all the way to the end. For me, with Hayley, the thing that impressed me a lot about her coming back into the game is I feel like being voted out really humbled her in a sense, where she came back saying, I don't know the answer to everything. I wasn't right in a lot of the things that I did. I burned George's trust, and I gave away his game. I burned my own alliance. I tried to flip on Andrew. She goes and apologizes to Andrew. She apologizes to George and Kara. Very smartly approaches Kara first, because she gets the fact that Kara's an empath and will be able to, pick up the emotions that she's feeling, the regret she's feeling. And then Kara kind of uses that as a way to she basically uses Kara to integrate integrate her back into that Brains tribe, which I thought was very smartly done from her. She's very socially aware, but Hayley is still Hayley, and I think that people, now that she's back and she's saying, "Hey, I want to do redemption. I don't want to do wrong by any of you guys that I've done wrong with before, and my redemption story is that I'm now going to stay loyal to you." I think people are going to sleep on her, and towards the end of this week, we see her say at the end, "I'm not happy with being fifth. I still came out here to win the game." She's still a killer of a game player and not someone that is going to sit back and let other people run the game necessarily. It's one of the things I really respect about Hayley, is that no matter if she's been voted out and came back into the game, she is a great game player, and good game players sometimes get taken out quite early. She kind of comes into this game with 10 people still remaining in the game. It's not that far off from Rick Devens in the position that Rick Devens came back into the game straight after the merge, and he had to sort of work his way towards the end. And I think that season, I was one of the people, and it might be divided because I know some people really didn't like the amount of screen time he got, but I would have been happy with a Rick Devens win, probably more so happy than a Chris Underwood win, getting back at the final 5 or that close to the end there, So hats off to her for coming back, doing everything right to get herself ingratiated back into the tribe here. I do want to talk about, in this first episode, obviously there's a massive target here with Danny and Emmett wanting to go at each other, and George spotting a great opportunity here to work within the chaos. And this has been George's thing this whole season. He's really good with the numbers. He understands when he can make moves and how to play that middle very effectively. And him taking control here and getting Gerald, out of the game. Yeah, it is correct. I was always saying Gerald, getting him out of the game is a good move here, because obviously he's very connected to Flick. He's very connected to Emmett. But it's also going to be the thing ultimately that makes Emmett finally turn his back on him, similar to how he betrays Laura in the next vote indirectly, and that gets Andrew to turn his back on George as well. So he's starting to run out of friends here. But I do still think ultimately George is no one's number 2 or number 3. He's kind of forced to playing this aggressive game, because if he didn't play this aggressive game, I feel like he wouldn't even get close to the end.
Yeah, of course. And that's been his game from day one. He's always been in the bottom. He only had the alliance of Wei. And even then, that was virtually non-existent, so paper thin. And he has worked his way from the bottom, finding immunity idols, then building that bridge with Baden, bringing in Kara later in the game, and really snowballing throughout. But certainly for him and Hayley as well, and the Brains tribe as a whole, the right move to take out Gerald here, recognizing that Danny and Emmett were essentially going after each other. The Brawn tribe was perfectly fractured, which meant it was a great opportunity for the Brains to win back the numbers there. Obviously, recognizing that Flick was going to be loyal to Emmett, play that idol on him, and Gerald was the least likely to have that idol played on him. Definitely the right move, not stick with either of the Brawn tribe, but really go with their own plan C in this case. And it worked out great for them and put them in a great position to determine who they wanted to get rid of.
Yeah, Dale says George deadass targeted and sent home all of his allies from post-swap Brains. Only one is left is Kara. And I think that he has done that, but he's also made sure to take out people from the other side as he's doing it. He's been jumping back and forth. So he's consistently been in a position where people thought that they needed him still and needed to work with him even when he was doing it. But he's starting to run out of a little bit of runway here towards the end of the week. Also sort of just a little bit of a character moment. But have you ever seen the George dance out in the clubs over there in Sydney? Is that quite familiar to you?
It might be big at the Bankstown Sports Club. I rarely go out that way. I usually don't go west of Newtown. So perhaps it is. Maybe once COVID's over, I'll have to go check it out and see if that's all the rage out in Bankstown and Lakemba and that sort of area. But look, not a bad move. There were some great dance moves there. Laura as well put on a show. But yeah, I'd like to see more of that. A Survivor dance-off will be a great challenge to see in the future. Potentially, if we go back to Fiji, we can see them do a Mecha challenge. But yeah, who knows? George is pulling out all the moves. He'd be good at limbo as well.
Yeah, I'll have to work on my hamstring strength when I finally get back in the gym after all the lockdowns to be able to pull all those moves out. I feel like I'd probably put my back out if I tried to do what he was doing. But great fun, that's the kind of moments that we love seeing on the show. And he does bring some of these character moments as well. I mean, the other thing that sort of stood out to me in this first episode when they went for the KFC reward and everybody went back home, he was licking the pockets of Danny to be able to taste a little bit of the KFC oil. It was pretty gnarly to look at. I don't know if I would, I don't know how you feel like if you've been out there for over 30 days without eating, but like she said, she hasn't actually washed her pants for 30 days.
Yeah, well, I think George does love his KFC, and we knew that about him from the preseason, even more so than his politics. KFC is probably number 2 in his life. So certainly, I'm sure he would have been kicking himself not to get some wicked wings and zinger burgers into him. So certainly, any sniff or lick he can get would certainly work well for him. I think it was the magic touch that really pushed him through the week, though, because that little sniff of KFC really turned his brain on because he started making some great moves.
Dale in the chat here says that the dance move that George is doing is called the duck walk. It is sort of a thing. Dale, whereabouts are you from, and where's that a thing? I've never seen it before, but maybe you're from Bankstown as well. Let us know. The rest of the episode, we get Gerald, being voted out here and being betrayed by George in the spot. And we didn't really see much of Gerald, like you said, past the merge. And, if we were to look at Gerald's game as a whole, where would we say that he go wrong? What do we think ultimately costed him his spot here early in the game? For me personally, I feel like, and again, we don't have much to go off because we didn't really hear much from him, but I feel like it may have been a little bit about flexibility and just not mingling with the enemy and not being open to potentially working with other people, because I feel like the only people he really talked strategy with were Emmett and Flick.
Yeah, well, I certainly think Gerald still had that connection with the likes of George and Kara, and obviously Danny. I think his only downfall was the fact that Danny and Emmett became fractured, and he was the scapegoat really in that instance. He was the one that had to go, because he was the one that would be the least likely to receive an idol being played on him. So certainly for Gerald, I can't knock him at all. He did play a great game. And while he wasn't as much of a mastermind as the likes of Emmett, Danny, George, or Hayley have been, he has played a great social game. He was clearly very well liked from the rest of his tribe. But I think much like how Kez went out, he really became a victim of idol euphoria and trying to create a blindside, trying to think 3 levels ahead, which was unfortunate to see him go. And it was a shame we didn't get to see too much more from Gerald, post-merge, because we got a lot of content from him in the pre-merge. But great character. I'd love to see him back potentially in a future season, maybe taking a spot similar to a Tarzan sort of figure, that Bushman sort of character. It'd be really fun to see back again. But yeah, really sad to see him go.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about that prior to coming on the live tonight, and I was thinking, who of this season do I actually want to see come back? And with the latest Survivor South Africa season, I think we're going to find it hard at the end of the season when we do our off-season content to just limit ourselves to 5 people, because there's just been so many great players from that season. When you look at Australian Survivor this season, I feel like it's going to be interesting. I feel like our opinions of who we may want to come back may be very different, because there's probably 2 standouts, maybe 3, that you think these are definites, and then you're going to have to throw a wild card or 2 in there. I do like Gerald. I think that he could bring a lot to another season. I just don't know if he's done enough, to come back, to be honest with, but we'll have a conversation about that off season and go through what we think, who would be the people that we'd love to see come back and play the game again. Now, in the next episode here, we have Emmett realizing, obviously, that, original Brawns are done. He needs to sort of switch up his game, and he starts working with the rest of the tribe here, who everybody sort of accepts and realizes that George is in a very powerful position in the game. And it sounds like Andrew wants to work with George. He sees him as a part of his alliance. Therefore, he wants to target Kara and get Kara out in the spot. So it's a really funny episode because, they get to the end of this episode and they decide that all of them are going to place a vote on Kara, making it very easy for George to counter this move. And I was just thinking to myself, clearly this shows we've got too many recruits playing this game, because if George would never have done that if Kara was his true target, which Hayley correctly points out in the next episode. And then Hayley, who's probably the only other person who's smart enough at this stage or experienced enough in playing the game who could split the vote. She just doesn't have the social capital to do it from her end because she's still trying to work her way back into the game. What did you think of this move? I just was absolutely gobsmacked that they were in 2021 playing a game where they're like, yep, we've got a full tribe strong. We're just going to put all the votes on one person.
Yeah, well, there was really no definite second vote, though. I mean, obviously, you got Andrew, who is playing a very lockstep game with Laura. Wei is really a key number that I don't think, while she is sitting in the middle, I don't think anyone really wants to lose her because she can have that ability to flip. And again, Danny, a key member to the Brawn's tribe. So I think it is hard for them to figure out who they're going to go against in this vote. And with only 4 people eligible to be voted out, there weren't that many options. I honestly don't blame them for putting all the votes on Kara. It certainly would have been smart for, say, maybe Hayley and a way to go against the grain just in case an idol was played on Kara, and maybe take out someone like Danny in a little underground move. Get rid of a bigger threat in the game and keep someone like Laura safe. But yeah, certainly the way it was played out with 5 people having immunity, it was really hard to pick who would have been the plan B in that instance.
Yeah, I mean, the twist this episode with having 5 people immune, 4 people that potentially could get voted out, I think just throws things right out of the window. And it comes down to what I said, where they're trying to keep the show interesting and not predictable post-merge. To me, I'm not as angry at this twist compared to the one where only one person had a vote at the end of it. Like, to me, that was just the absolute, like, I think it's going to go down as one of the worst twists in the history of any Survivor season. Dare I say, probably up there with Edge of Extinction. I don't know if I might hate this more than Edge of Extinction, which is a lot for me. Having one person, get the sole vote to who they're going to send at the beginning of a merge tribe, I just think is an absolute ridiculous power to have. But in this case, there's still a little bit more planning that you can do for it. There's a little bit more countering that you can do in regards to, because every single person still has a vote. You know what I mean? So there's 4 people that can get targeted, but everybody still has a vote. It's very convenient that George gets this, sort of thing here that's going to save Kara ultimately in the game. The key that he can unlock the idol at Tribal Council. But again, for all those conspiracy theorists out there, I will say that, George is working. I mean, there is a reason this guy's finding all the idols. I said it back in the day for Ben Driebergen as well, when people were like, he's been given idols and all this kind of stuff. There is a craft to finding idols. You need to know what you're looking for. You need to have the experience of already having found a few. And you can just see Kara and George again finding it towards the end of the week with another idol. But overall, I think the thing that's quite interesting here is, we've got a completely new idol in the game, something that's never been used before. And Australian Survivor this season has brought so many twists, so many idols. It's been a little bit of sensory overload, but I do want to talk about this idol and the concept of it in isolation to everything else that we've seen this season. I really like this twist. I really like the fact that you can play an idol and you can hide the fact that you've played this idol. I think George did it incorrectly. I mean, it's hard to be critical because he's in the game. I'm sitting in the comfort of my chair here. It's easy to make the right decisions. The right decision was to let Kara know about it in advance so she at least could pretend at Tribal Council like she played it. She was as shocked as everybody else when it was being played. And then George thought that he would be able to convince people that she knew what she was doing. Like, I mean, her body language at Tribal Council told everyone that she didn't know what the hell was going on. But overall, what do you think of the idol and the fact that you can play this unanimously and the way that it was hidden? Like, I thought there was a lot of creativity and a lot of good stuff that went into this specific twist and this specific idol within the game.
Yeah, it's always great to think up of different twists to have the idol. It gets a little bit boring after a certain time when you find an idol in a log or under a rock, and then you play that before the votes, and Bob's your uncle. I mean, in this instance, there is that sort of almost invisibility towards it, that anonymity. I can't say that word, but certainly, it gives the potential for someone like George to create a blindside like that. Had that gotten into Hayley's hands, potentially she could have played it to save someone and created, a lot of chaos. Certainly, the way it landed into George's hands, it didn't, create that much drama. Because Laura was ultimately a pretty safe vote. But certainly, had that been played to get out someone like Emmett or something like that, you have that ability to create massive moves without anyone knowing who's playing it, which I think is great. I wouldn't criticize George for the way he played it back at camp. I don't really think he had that much of an option to play it any other way. It was definitely the best move to pin it on Kara and say that Kara played the idol. But at the end of the day, it saved his ally in the game, and he's managed to maneuver and figure out a way to keep Flick and Way close to him. It created an enemy in Andrew, but it's still put him in a good position, I think.
You said keep Flick and Kara close to them. What do you mean by that?
Hayley and I don't know what did I say?
Hayley and
Way.
Kara.
Hayley and Way.
Okay, so looking at it, obviously you're right. It could have been used to take someone bigger out for sure, but they had an option between Way, Kara, Laura, and Danny. So you might sort of argue that Danny was the big move there, but in reality, Danny wasn't the big move. Like, we get a lot of confessionals from Danny, and one of the things, I like Danny. Danny is someone I wouldn't mind. She's maybe someone I would fight for more than Gerald to say, I would like to see Danny come and play the show again, because she's been a good character this season. But how often has she actually been right when she's tried to make moves? Like, she's always this confident. Oh, Big Emmett's going this time, or this is happening this time, or she's running the show on Simon. But then every time someone else comes, like a Hayley or a George, and they one up her on her move, and it becomes not her move, and she starts getting blindsided. So I don't feel like she's not really a big game player this season. She's just someone we see a lot of in the edit. And I take my hat off to her for trying to play the game and trying to make moves, but she hasn't really been able to actually get things to go her way this season. She's definitely not been in control of the flow of the game for me this season. So taking her out, to me, wouldn't have made as much sense, because she's already in the minority and kind of on her own in any case, because she got rid of her allies early in the game. Someone like a Simon, that I said was a bad mistake from day one, because he would have worked closely with her and would have been a threat, someone that could have taken on some of these other bigger guys in the show at the merge stage. There would have always been a lot of opportunity for her still to get rid of Simon, but I think he wanted to play the game with her. One of the things I've never actually said on the show, and I keep forgetting it, and every time afterwards I'm like, man, I wanted to mention this to Riley, is that I think Danny came into the show with a game plan. And her game plan, and she kind of tells us about that, was to get close to the alpha, vote the alpha out. And it was a predetermined game plan that she probably told people about before she even got on the show, like her partner saying, hey, I'm going to get on the show. I'm going to get the biggest, baddest alpha, the Dave Gannett type of guy. I'm going to be close to him, and I'm going to cut him. And the problem that you have when you come into a show like Survivor with a preconceived plan outside of the game, and you want to apply it inside of the game, is that the personalities and the people that you're playing with is hard to predict. Like, for instance, someone like a Simon could have been a very valuable ally for her, and she was willing to cut him that early, And if you look at like George here with saving Kara, he sees the value in a very loyal ally, someone he can rely on, someone that's put their life out there for them before and actually sacrificed herself to save him. He knows that that's valuable, so he's willing to play the idol to save her. I don't think that there's a lot of players that would have done what he did in this episode. I don't think a lot of players would have put their game at risk, because he goes, and he knows, he goes into the next episode with the biggest target on his head, because people know that there's only one person that would have saved Kara in this spot, So hats off to George for doing what he did here. But it's gonna lead to some fireworks going into the final episode, because Andrew's gonna be livid, because Laura was the correct vote, because she was very close to Andrew, and she was in a group of brains that were working pretty well together, which prevented George from climbing the ranks within that brains group as a whole. But Andrew's completely peeved off to the point where now he wants to have a conversation with Emmett and Flick and Danny and those guys at the well, and it leads to one of the most uncomfortable conversations that we've ever seen on the show this season.
Yeah, well, certainly for Andrew. I mean, he has lost his closest ally with Kara and George, rather Kara's decision to get rid of Laura. Again, there wasn't really another option. I do think the move to get rid of Danny would have been good, just to fraction the Brawns a little bit more. But yeah, perhaps with Danny being sort of a lone vote, not having a close ally in the game now that Chelsea's gone, and really Flick has almost appeared to be closer with Emmett. It probably was the right move to make. But yeah, Andrew, I don't think he has the social capital to, put that motion in place. But certainly, he picked the right target to go against. Obviously, George being, clearly the biggest target from day one. I don't think it's groundbreaking, to create an alliance that excludes George and tell George to F off. Certainly something we've seen many times throughout the season. But yeah, look, a great decision to start, building more momentum against George. But again, George's his resume is just stacking up to the point now where he's becoming this massive threat, and it still seems insane to me that he's still in the game. But time and time again, he just manages to find a way to survive. There's always a bigger target, and if he is the target at Tribal Council, he's got something to save him.
Now, Larry has mentioned twice here that, Chris, what you're saying about George also applies to Tony during Winners of War. And I think it's somewhere in the beginning of the show I said something about George. So you're going to have to refresh my memory in regards to what I pointed out. But I do see similarities in the bombastic nature of how George is playing the game and the fact that he's willing to make big game moves. I do see some similarities in that regard, but it's hard because you can't really compare. Like, we want to compare people to Tony. We want to see another Tony, but I feel like there's only one Tony Vlachos, and that's the one that we saw on Winners of War and Kagiyan. It's very hard to compare him to a player at that level, in my mind, in any case. On this episode as well, obviously George is going to heavily rely on Hayley and Wei, and he's going to start realizing when he doesn't get chosen here for the reward, him, Hayley, Wei, and Kara, they all go back to camp, which gives George an opportunity to work on these alliances or these members in the alliance to form a very tight four. And he uses the whole fact that, he's someone that is willing to put his game on the line for his people. That's what he literally just did with playing the idol on Kara and the round before, and he kind of says to them that he's willing to do that for them in this case as well. What did you think of his approach in this case here? And specifically, I guess we don't hear much from Wei in this scenario, but Hayley's thoughts after that, because she's very much 50-50 at this point still, and if she should play with George, who she knows can turn against her at any point, has got a massive resume, or if she should actually listen to him and go up against Emmett in this round.
Yeah, well, obviously George would never play his idol for Hayley and Wei to keep them safe. Kara has clearly been his only ally since they joined on. It would have been about day 10. But I think, yeah, again, Hayley and Wei can go either way. There are a lot of targets on the board, Hayley being one of them. So for her to figure out, do I want to keep that shield in front of me like a George? Because I've probably got more opportunity to work with him in the game, because Emmett has that close relationship with Danny, and Danny to a lesser extent, but Flick as well. That Brawn alliance is solid, whereas George really doesn't have anyone. All he has is Kara. So to keep George and work with George, who's clearly a bigger target than her, and someone that doesn't have that social capital in the game, someone that's always going to be at the bottom, it's probably the right move to make. If you have the numbers and the ability to go against another faction and eliminate a strong player in the game, it's always the right move to make. And she recognized where her position was within the tribe, and within Emmett's greater alliance. She recognized she was probably going to be towards the bottom of that alliance there, and she didn't have too much opportunity to maneuver. So certainly for her and Wei to decide to flip to George, which is more so someone we saw after the immunity challenge, it does give her more flexibility in the game to determine where she goes in the future. And taking out Emmett now is probably the right decision. Obviously still keeping in a big target like George, but giving her the opportunity to move and build a closer bond with someone like a Flick now that Emmett's out.
So Ben says here, I think Emmett really ended his game when he had the top 5 conversation with Hayley. And I kind of alluded to that a little bit earlier on when I was talking to you. And I said, Hayley is not someone that is going to play a casual or passive game. She's pretending to be a passive player at this stage. And she's apologizing, doing the apology tour, just trying to help and be loyal to the people around her. But she still wants to win this game. And it's why I still respect her, even though she's come back into the game and she's getting a second shot at potentially winning this here. And I know people are going to complain if she does go all the way and if she wins the show. You've got to respect the fact that she is still a player, and she even acknowledges that she likes to play with someone like a George in the game. She respects this game because he's willing to make moves, because I think that like Hayley sees a lot of similarities between herself and someone like a George in the game. But I think that George was very aware of the threat of Hayley prior to taking her out. But I feel like now that he's taken her out, he's a little bit, obviously he does find out later on that she's plotting against him, but I do think he trusts her maybe a little bit too much at this stage still within the game. We also have Adam here on the live chat. Adam, welcome to the stream. Crazy how many people have gone from top of the pecking order to bottom to back up again. It's almost a new game every episode. And I think that's kind of speaking towards what you were saying in the beginning of the show, Riley. It has been a difficult season to predict because they're throwing so many advantages and twists, and, one person gets the vote, everybody out. Four people are only on the block this round. There's so many different things that are happening that it's very almost like lotto at certain stages in regards to what's going to happen. It's hard to predict.
Yeah, and absolutely, and that's the thing with this season having so many advantages. Even from the first tribal council where half the tribe were immune, people have had to adjust to that and figure out, what path they have to take to circumvent and get around these advantages. But certainly, it has been crazy to see. George has been on the bottom from day one. Hayley and Kara were both voted out at stages in the game, but they're still standing and still making power moves. One episode, Kara and George might be in the minority, but because there's so many people in the middle, like Andrew, Hayley, and Way, they have the ability to flip to determine, what's the best vote. I do like seeing this fluid sort of gameplay as opposed to, just a straight Pagongin. I think that's one of the great things about having so many advantages in the game is there's always that unpredictability and that level of playing one step ahead and, not building close alliances and working with multiple people on the merged tribe, having those opportunities to go different ways without completely alienating other people. And I think that's been a great thing about this season. It's been so unpredictable.
Now, Riley, do you think that when we look at George and Kara in this game, when there's this inevitable season of Survivor dynamic duos, will they be the first duo on the list of people that will come back? And has there ever been a better and stronger duo in the game than these two? Obviously, Luke Toki and Jericho, and Luke Toki and David Gannat comes up as two great duos as well, with Luke being in the middle of those two duos. But, they've gone further than Luke Toki and David Gannat did together in their original season together. So I'm kind of thinking they might be the new power couple in the show's history at this point.
There will always be one power couple, and that will be Shawnella. Shawnee and Fenella will always be, for me, the greatest power couple. Two of my favorite characters as well. I think with Kara and George, we saw that relationship really bloom out of desperate nature, both of them being on the bottom and recognizing that, Kara almost reached out to George, recognizing he had no one else in the game. Those two connecting on that level and riding it out all the way. Obviously, Kara played her idol for George at one stage and voted herself out, ostensibly. But then, now George has returned that favor and played that for Kara. It is great to see these close alliances forming throughout the game. Chelsea and Danny are probably another strong duo we saw this season. Obviously, with Chelsea's elimination, we didn't get to see them play their full game. But it's always great seeing a pair of players playing together, especially if they're on the bottom, and finding ways to survive each and every episode. It's great to see.
Now, Jenny K here on the topic of Chelsea says, will we potentially see a non-elimination episode come up next Sunday or Monday due to Chelsea's Medivac? Because obviously that wasn't pre-planned and they've got a quota of episodes that they have to do. So we probably could see another non-elimination twist come into play here. What do you think we're looking at in regards to that? And do we think that this non-elimination episode comes up as soon as George is being voted out, making it the second power couple or power person this season that potentially gets saved by a twist?
Yeah, well, it could be just another instance like the first champions versus contenders, where they maybe vote to get rid of someone's voting power. We had the Dead Man Walking twist there played on Commando. Wasn't the biggest fan, but certainly, it fills out an episode and gives them that opportunity. Again, they can have another Redemption Island duel or Redemption Rock duel if they like. But I certainly think at this stage it's probably too late in the game now with 7 people left, unless they're going to do it, over the next 2 episodes. I think I'd be placing my money on another Dead Man Walking type twist, or potentially we just have a whole episode dedicated to the family visit, something like that. I don't know what will happen, but certainly I do see a non-elimination episode coming up this week. It seems like the logical thing because they're not going into the final episode with just the 2 players.
Dale says that he likes to see just a man and woman power couple that isn't romantic, just purely platonic. So, is George and Kara the Malcolm and Denise of this season? They went pretty far that season as well. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You have George. George is a young guy as well. I think he's only just in his early 30s, as well. And I think Kara is a bit of I don't want to bring age up here, but I think she's an older lady as well. So potentially, pretty close to that.
Yeah, and again, I think that's a great comparison. Obviously, Denise and Malcolm were on the bottom of the Mat Singh tribe and really had to fight for their position in the game. And at the swap, they were swapped to different tribes. Very similar circumstances to Kara and George here. I do actually really like that comparison. And look, I don't see Cara and George having that power in the game, I don't see them getting too much further. Because I think their days are really numbered at this point. But yeah, a great alliance to see, and it's always fun seeing people from different walks of life connect on a level and really have that strong alliance in the game. Richard and Rudy are a great example of that. Two completely different people who have just formed this lifelong friendship. It's always fun to see those sorts of relationships play out in Survivor.
Now, Riley, if you ever were to play on Australian Survivor, Australian Survivor in 2 or 3 seasons from now, would you say, what George did in this episode, is a 10 out of 10? And would you also do this and go and lie in snake-infested grass to go and wait above the well to listen to people talk? Because I thought it was one of the most brilliant moments, because the whole episode, when I was looking at this, I was thinking to myself, Hayley's outplaying George. Hayley's outplaying George. And then suddenly when that happened, I was like, okay, George is not asleep at the wheel. He's willing to sit up there, sit in the grass and listen to them as they talk about him and potentially take him out of the game. Would you go and do the same? And would you agree that is probably why George is getting so far in this game? Because he is just someone that works harder than anyone else, similar to like a Tony, similar to like a Ben Driebergen in his season, who's willing to go out there and find the idols. It's one of the reasons why I always say, if you're out there in the game, never leave anything up to chance. Go out there and look for these things, look for any advantage that you can. And in the Outback, we were talking about it a couple of weeks ago. We said we probably won't see a spy shack this season because it's just so bare and dry there that there's no place to hide. But George finds a way.
Yeah, it's a spy savannah, I think, finding a way to hide in the grass. Certainly great. But, George, credit to him for pulling in Hayley and Way, recognizing that, they might be willing to jump to the other side and get rid of someone like Emmett. And Hayley, again, you got to give credit to her for recognizing that, we should keep this on the down low so that, we don't cause too many ripples, because if they get wind of the plan, they're probably going to put 4 votes on George and it might go to a revote or something like that. Obviously, Cara found the idol in the end, which they would have been able to use, but certainly it gave them another option in the game, knowing that the vote was split. And I think George did a great job of that as well, sort of downplaying it and not throwing Andrew's name out or Emmett's name out so no one would scurry for the idol, and it almost added that level of safety there, so they could have that plan in place had it come to it. So credit to both George, Hayley, Way as well. A great decision to, switch her position in the game and, find a new lease of life in the game. Cara as well, not playing the idol, a brilliant move. I think the 4 of them did a really great job here. But, for Emmett and Flick, Andrew and Danny, again, it would have been a perfectly executed plan to, draw out that 4-2-2 split. Obviously, it didn't work in the end because they didn't have that assurance of their alliance, which wasn't too nice to see.
Now, obviously we see Andrew dominate quite a bit as well now in the immunities, where, Emmett had 3 immunities, Andrew had 2 immunities in a row, and then finally Hayley becomes the first female to win immunity this season, which was great to see her get on the board there as well. But this is going to be interesting because when Hayley votes out Emmett, she says that she would much rather vote someone out that potentially could take challenges away from her at this stage than vote out the strategic mastermind. I do think, we've seen Hayley perform at a certain level throughout the season, and she has definitely got immunity wins in her. Do we think that she is going to target Andrew next year? Because she does seem to be in an alliance of, 4 people that I don't think is going to turn. I feel like George and Cara is going to find their home here with Hayley and Way in the game at the moment, and I don't think that he's going to go back to that side that just try to vote him out. George does hold that kind of thing against people, and the only reason he hasn't been forced to kind of choose a side is because he hasn't really been found out in the game until just recently. So I feel like Hayley's got a little bit of ability to move around here. And, George is someone that is consistently, except for that one where they had to run up the hill and he was 5th, he's consistently dropping out of the challenges quite early on as well. And I think he's on purpose probably adding to that whole persona if he's not strong in challenges. So I feel like Hayley's move here is to go after Andrew, who's someone that could potentially win some of these challenges as well moving forward.
Yeah, well, certainly if you get the opportunity to get rid of George, I think it's never going to be a bad move. I don't see Hayley playing out the game with Cara and George. I think her perfect move was to get rid of Emmett so she can isolate Flick and Danny and work with them again, rebuild that bridge, and not have them being tied to the old Brawn's alliance, having them really to herself. Certainly, it looks like Andrew and George obviously coming to a head, and having this sort of feud after Laura was sent home. It will be interesting to see now that with Andrew dominating the challenges, is that going to add to his target? I still think George is clearly, though, the public enemy number one on this tribe. If there's any chance of getting him out, his name is always going to come up consistently at Tribal Council. And I'd love to see him survive and continue to fight his way through the game and keep his torch alive. Whether it's possible, I don't know. Certainly, it will take a lot of luck and maneuvering. But it would be a great story to see George really dominate the game and continue to go from strength to strength, despite being this cockroach. It does have a lot of similarities to Harry Hills from Champions vs Contenders 2, where he's constantly been on the bottom, constantly been ostracized by his tribe, but he's still managing to find a way to cling on.
No, 100%. I mean, let me put it out there, though. George gets through this whole week and he manages to save his closest ally, and they end up with an idol. So we're now looking at a final 7 with 2 players that are extremely tight, that are not going to turn against each other, which only leaves 5 other players out there that potentially could vote. So if they were to work together and if they were to get all 5 of them to agree, the next person, and they really have to make the move next week. They can't wait one more vote. They have to make the move against George and Kara next week. If they get 5 people to vote together, they could do a 3-2 split, which means that even if they play the idol on one of them, there's going to be a draw 2-2 and a revote, and then whoever didn't have the idol played on them potentially goes home in that spot. So George is very much in danger. I think Kara didn't play the idol on George this time around because she is getting closer and closer to the end of the game. She's not going to throw her game out there again for George like she did earlier in the season. So the real key at the moment in the show is Wei, because George still thinks he's got something with Wei. We just don't know what Wei's thinking, where she's moving. Is the reason that Wei maybe doesn't get any edit here is because she turns her back on George again, who potentially is a production favorite at this time of the show. And they just thought, well, if this is what you're going to do, we don't care to tell your story. Is that maybe why we're not seeing a lot from Wei here? But, for me personally, I feel like if you're looking at these guys and where they're sitting at the moment, George and Kara, if they can survive one more vote, they're laughing. They are going to make a move because they're not going to have enough players to potentially switch it up and split the vote effectively after this, and also get rid of the idol at the same time. So it's getting really dangerous for the other players that are left in the game here. They really need to make this move because 2 people when there's 7 players left is dangerous. 2 people when there's 6 players left, super dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. And they do have that ability, especially with George and Kara, both having found multiple idols at this stage. They know how to find idols and know how to play them to save themselves. Maybe Kara doesn't after that move to essentially vote herself out. But they're finding ways to survive, and I think these next 2 tribal councils are going to be crucial. Obviously, final 5 will be the last opportunity to play those idols, but Kara and George clearly have to be the split vote plan, because if George continues to the final 6, finds an idol, and works his way towards the end, I do think George has a very legitimate case at Tribal Council. Even though he has burned a lot of the jury, he has been playing from literally day one. He's been on the bottom, creating shockwaves, always been the target of basically every Tribal Council. So I do think George is looking like the biggest threat to win at the moment, as much as the jury are saying that Wei is a threat to win. George is probably public enemy number 1 now, and yeah, every episode he survives, every tribal he survives, every idol he plays is another reason to get rid of him. And now that book is bursting at the seams. There needs to be some wiggle room to get him out at this point. That it would be stupid of Flick and Wei to continue going along those lines. They really need to flip here and shake things up, get rid of George, because he's clearly the biggest threat.
If George goes all the way to the end here and he loses to Hayley at the end, for instance, this would go down as one of the worst seasons. Like, if you look at just what he put in and the fact that he's not been voted out and he's really dominated the game. Hayley at this point is probably the second best player in the game. Even though she's been voted out, she's still the second best player in the game. And there's like a massive gap between the rest of the players out there in regards to what they've done in the game and how they've been able to move and sort of twist things. Danny has tried, but like I said, she's been outplayed at every every angle when she's trying to make a big move. So I don't think Danny is winning the show by any means, but it's going to be interesting to see how it sort of goes into the end game here and to see if George actually gets there until the end. I also just wanted to touch on some of the reward challenges here. Obviously they had the KFC bucket, which was a bit of food. And then probably the big one this week was the D-Max Isuzu that was up for grabs. And I'm not so good with my memory sometimes when it comes to the different versions of the show. Have they done the car win before in Australian Survivor? And, has the curse been broken in Australian Survivor? I know that it's broken in Survivor South Africa with Rob Bentelli getting the car and then still winning the show at the end of the day. What are we looking like on the show for Australian Survivor? And also, with the D-Max there, what a reward to win, man. Like, I've been wanting a ute for such a long time. And I was very jealous of seeing Danny win that. Way better than a car, especially if you're in Australia and you guys have got such a great ability to go and do off-roading and 4x4 over there. You could really put that to good use, and I think Danny is really going to use it. She seems like someone that was really chuffed at getting the D-Max.
Yeah, of course we have those. We've had the rewards with the likes of Holden and the like in the past, but yeah, a great sponsor to get for the show. I was very jealous of that brand new D-Max, a great car to win. And yeah, the car curse is well and truly alive in Australian Survivor. And yeah, as Jenny says here, I might be writing off Danny at this point. She could very well be the one to go, and Dale here saying, yeah, Michelle Dugan in 2017, Brian Lake in 2018, Abby Holmes in Champions vs Contenders 2, and yeah, Lee from season 1. Lee obviously made it to Tribal Council and lost to Christy. And again, the others, I think Abby was eliminated at the final 4. Brian in a similar position as well, I think. Final 3, he was eliminated. And Michelle, I think she was final 3 or 4 as well. So, perhaps Danny's going to, that final 4. It may well happen. That might be the trend that continues there. But yeah, Danny gets a great prize, but it might come at a cost.
Yeah, and I wonder if we can really say the car curse has been broken, because in Survivor South Africa, you don't actually win the car. You get to lend it for like a year or lease it for a year, something like that. So, in that sense, you don't actually win the car. So I don't know if the curse has fully been broken and if that counts or it doesn't count. But it's interesting to note these things. Great reward. And like you said, a great sponsor for the show as well. Those D-Maxes, man, I tell you what, I've been looking at a ute for a while now. And I've always been looking at Toyota, Ford, and Isuzu. Isuzu's coming up. They're an up-and-coming brand, and they've got all the bells and whistles when it comes to the interior of it and all the extra specs you get with it. I think it's going to be pretty cool. So I was really happy for her. It is funny seeing the others in the truck there with her saying, oh, well done, great for you to win it. But in their minds, they're thinking, they're just hating it because they would have loved to have won it in that case as well. So good on her for winning that specific reward, great reward to win. And also the other thing I wanted to touch on, that challenge that they were running up and down the hill, that was just made for Andrew. His body build, the type of body build that he's got is that Ethiopian long distance runner, skinny, lean type of build. I knew he was going to dominate at that. And he's been a beast throughout, any kind of the endurance challenges and things like that. And we know he's a massive character. If you follow his YouTube channel, he's a massive character. Like, I thought he was going to be like a Luke Toki type of crazy character coming into the season like we saw season 1. But again, another person we've hardly heard anything from until the point where he's now trying to make a move against George. Finally, they're giving us a little bit of content from him, but I feel like it's just a little bit too late really here in the show. And I don't know where he's going to end up, but I just don't see him realistically winning the show moving forward. I do want to move into our draft picks here towards the end of the show to have a look and see where we're sitting. And we've now moved into the final stages of the game here, and we've got a couple of people here that we need to take off the board that we end up losing. We end up losing Gerald, we end up losing Emmett this week, and Laura is the other person just before Emmett there. So still very close between us here going into the final stages of the game, Riley. We've got 7 people still in the game. I've got Danny, George, and Way. You've got Hayley, Flick, Andrew, and Kara still left in the game. And this is the point now where I'd like to go into the power rankings. I think I did the power rankings last week. I started us off. This time around, I'm going to go over to you and let you do the power rankings. And I say what, Riley, next time when we do this for next season, I think we're going to get a spreadsheet out and we're going to start giving them points, because I really want to get to the end of the season to see how right were we and how wrong were we in our top 3 moving forward. This season, it's more just trialing it out, seeing what's working. But I think next season we'll put a spreadsheet to it as well. But getting into it, Riley, one of our top power ranking people were voted out this week in Emmett. Both of us had him in our power rankings. So who do we have in the power rankings now? And will we be right or wrong moving forward here? It's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think Gerald might have even been in my power rankings as well. I think
it was in yours, not in mine.
No, not in yours. But yeah, sad to see. Gerald, obviously a massive character, as we discussed. Emmett, a huge character, and someone I think JLP has a massive man crush on him, and we'll see him back in another All-Star season in the future. And Laura, again, made lots of waves and fought off the bottom. In terms of my power rankings, though, I'm still going to say number 1, Hayley, number 2, Flick. I've been very adamant on that the whole time. Really since the merger. I think they're the 2 key power players. Hayley obviously playing the middle and playing a pivotal role in getting rid of Emmett. A great move by her. And as I said, to get rid of Emmett, it removes that leech almost for Hayley to Flick rather to hang on to. It removes a Brawn. It removes a tie to that original tribe where Hayley can now really try and get her way in and create a strong bond with Danny and Flick to move further in the game. I see George going far, but I think his time is almost coming up. So I might have to give my number 3 power ranking to Kara, which I'm almost shocked to say. She's made some bad moves in the game, obviously accidentally voting out Danny and accidentally voting out herself as well. But I think that she's probably, with the idol in her pocket, if she plays that at the next tribal council and maybe sends home someone like George, I can see her potentially being brought to final tribal council as a GOAT, more so in terms of someone being dragged along, not the greatest of all time. She doesn't really have that case, but certainly she could potentially, I don't see her doing it, but maybe betray George, maybe create some waves in this next episode and see if she can make some moves. But with her idol in her pocket, I think she's got that leverage in the game to keep her safe. At least another tribal council. I'm going to put her in number 3 after Hayley and Flick.
Okay, so going into my power rankings, I do agree with you once again here. I think I've had Hayley as my number 1, except for week 2. That was the only week I didn't think she was winning the show. I do still think she's number 1 and she's going to win the show based on what we've seen so far. She's playing a good game. She's undercover. People have forgotten about the threat that she is in the game, and the fact that she's come back humble have made people lower their guard. And I think she's going to get that knockout punch, similar to what Tony did in Winners of War. I think she's used the similar strategy just to lower her threat, wait for the right opportunity. And I think her big move is going to be when she eventually takes George out of the game. I agree with you. I don't think George makes it to the final. So for that very reason, I'm going to have to go with Flick. I think it's the first time she's in my top 3. I'm going to put her at 2 as well. I think you're right. She probably, I don't know if she's winning the game. I honestly feel like it's either George or Hayley based on the edit. I wouldn't be angry if she won the game. And also just, condolences to her and her family for losing her mother while she was out there playing the game. I don't know if I personally would have had it in me to continue to play the game if I lost my mother while being out there. And it's just, obviously if your family tells you it's okay, like she had that conversation, you probably continue on, but it must be the most difficult thing in the world to do, to focus on a game such as this when something has happened in real life, even if she was prepared for it and she knew it was going to eventually happen. And like she said, she mentally prepared herself for it years ago. I just think it just speaks to her strength to be able to go through a show like this and be isolated from her family in a time like that. So, but she's been playing a great game. She's socially really good. She just hasn't controlled anything. So I just don't know, like a lot of the content we've gotten from her spells, potential final 3, final 2, 0 votes type of finalist. I don't see her winning the show, but still enough to think that she potentially could get to the end there. And in the last vote, I can't put George out of it yet. Like, I'm just going to continue to hang on to George in my top 3 because he still gets enough good content and we see enough of him directing the play, him being aware that Hayley's trying to turn on him. They didn't need to show us all of that. They still show us that he's seeing her potentially coming for him. So we could still be surprised here at the last minute and he could still snuff her and get to her before she gets to him. I don't know how it's going to play out in the end, but you've got to give respect and put respect on his name for the type of game that he's played this season. I think it has been really, really great to watch. Also, just wanting to touch base on what you mentioned there in regards to Emmett. We had George at the end there saying that the only thing that Emmett does well and why he's so miserable is just because he's just standing there looking good, doing the really loud confessional when he's voting him out, which was really funny to see. I don't think Emmett was a great game player this season. I really don't think he gets this game. I mean, he goes into tribal council saying that, he can't play with people who deceive and backstab, and it's just not his thing. If Emmett ran this game, like that, it's very much like the same as Lee in the beginning about mateship. I got that kind of vibe from him there when he was saying that, and I don't know. I don't know if we want to see him back. Like, do we really need him back at this stage in the game? So I'll leave that up to the public to decide in regards to if they would like to see Emmett come back. I have liked him at certain points in the season, but then there's also been times in the season where I just thought he was just a good physical challenge threat in the game. I don't think he was a great game player necessarily.
Yeah, I think Emmett has actually, I disagree with you. I think Emmett's played a great game, obviously. He may not have got the votes in the early Brawn tribe there after that Gavin blindside, but certainly when he came to the new Brains camp, he managed to find a way to create numbers, bring in George and Kara, and he has created a lot of key blindsides in the game. What caught up to him in the end, though, was he was just winning so many immunity challenges. I can see him coming back in an All-Star season as a figure similar to David Gannat. And I know a lot of people were really not too happy about his confessionals earlier in the season for maybe being an off-brand golden god, but I really think Emmett has firmed as his own character. He's given us some great confessionals. He's played a great game, in my opinion.
That's fair.
That I think is definitely deserving of another appearance in the future.
Like, based on being a great character, I'll say yes. I don't think he was a strategic mastermind personally this season. I think he's done some good things. Yes, I will admit to that. But I think just based on the fact that he was a good character, had some great confessionals, he was good at the challenges, probably, throw him back in there. If we can bring other people back that didn't even make the merge when we did our first All-Stars, then definitely you could look at bringing him back in a season such as that. And another thing that I wanted to say is, because I do like him as a person, I think he's a nice guy, and people were going really hard at him from the start of the season, which I felt was a little bit unfair towards him, because you want to go out there and play the game and put on a TV show. You don't want to fear about the fact that people are going to hate you for being a character. But I think Emmett could do well in the challenge. I think he would do exceptionally well at a competition where every single thing that you do is based on your performances in different challenges. And I think he's physically in great shape. I think that's another potential. If we're looking at the challenge currently, bringing in Survivor Romania players and Survivor Turkey and all these different countries they're looking at, then might as well look at someone like an Emmett and a Brooke, when it comes to Australian Survivor, as two people that could go in there and do pretty well. I don't know if Luke would want to do it. Luke was the record holder for the challenges just prior to Brooke stealing it from him in All-Stars. But, at the end of the day, I think you're right. He might be someone that we're going to see back at some form in the future at some stage. When we know how in Australia they do like to create these celebrities when it comes to reality TV and bring people back more often than not. But I do think that George is someone hands-on, we'll see again. I think we can go into those kind of speculations at the end of the season when we talk about who do we think will come back for an All-Star season or who do we want to see play in a second chance season. Now, Riley, it's getting to the pointy end here. Is there anything that we did not touch upon that you would like to go into that I might have missed out on?
Yeah, I do just want to say, again, condolences to Flick and her family for losing Flick's mother there. Really unfortunate. I know that a couple of players are having auctioning off some of their clothing items in the game. I know George has his dog shirt up for grabs, Gerald selling his Akubra, and Kez selling those iconic red shorts, which he hid the idol in. All proceeds go to Dementia Australia. So please, if you're interested in those items, check them out on their individual social medias and support a great foundation and help fight this disease.
No, 100%. All right, so that's really it, guys. Thanks for all the people here that have joined us in the live once again. It's always great to get questions and things like that. Chris Dixon, thanks for joining as well. I did see you there in the chat, just didn't have an opportunity to say hello. Riley, you've got your own channel there or your other channel snuffed at the moment. What do you have coming up in the next week?
Yeah, well, just this morning I posted a new video on JT Thomas, the winner of Survivor Token Genes. I'll be wrapping up the first half of my winner series. Natalie White should be coming next week, and Sandra Diaz Twine Mark II, Heroes vs. Villains, should be coming shortly thereafter. Also doing some other content. I believe I'll be creating a new video discussing JLP and his merits as a host, potentially to take over Jeff Probst in the future. So keep an eye out for that one in the coming weeks on Snuffed right here on YouTube.
Ooh, Adam's going to come at you. I don't think he'd like JLP to take over. He wants it to be Boston Rob who takes over after Jeff Probst. But Riley, quick question here, and just the yes or no answer. Should JT come back and play for another time out on Survivor?
I'm a big fan of JT. I've really enjoyed him. I don't discount his game and Game Changers or Heroes vs. Villains, to be honest. Heroes vs. Villains, obviously, Russell, he wasn't aware of who he was at all. It would have been a great move had it happened, one of the greatest moves, had he managed to pull it off. Obviously, it didn't turn out too well for him, but it did create some great TV. You know, I'd like to see JT for a fourth time around. Is it likely? I don't know. There are other winners I'd like to see over him, like an Earl Cole or you know, a Richard Hatch, which is never going to happen. But you know, I can hope, kind of. I'd love to see him back at some stage. And yeah, a great player.
I knew me and you, like, you know, we do have our differences sometimes in opinion, but when it comes to the things that matter, we always agree. And I think that JT should come back and play another time. I do think there's some personal stuff that's gone on outside of the game, allegedly, that has prevented him from coming back and playing the show again. But I do hope that he gets that opportunity to come back and play the game again that we all love. Now, on Reality Pop, we've got Survivor South Africa recap coming up this weekend. At this stage, it does just look like it's going to be me and Riley on that recap, because we were going to have Jack Berger, who's now going to do not next weekend, but the weekend after that. He's had to make a last-minute change. So it'll be the first time in a while that we get to just talk about the show ourselves and what we think about what's going on there. It's been a great season. So if you haven't watched Survivor South Africa Immunity Island, go and watch it. I reckon it's one of the best international seasons, and depending on how it's going to end, might go down as the best international season. I'm going to put it up pretty high. We've got only a few players left in the game, and they're all very, very good players that could win the game, and you'd still feel like it was a very strong season. So we'll have a recap coming up for that on Saturday, and then on Sunday, we will have the exit interview with the latest castaway from Survivor South Africa Immunity Island as well. And also on Saturday and Friday evening in America at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will be talking about The Challenge, Season 37, Episode 3. The season has had a good start so far as well. So those are all the podcasts that I'm going to be involved in over the next couple of days. So look out for that. As always, guys, thank you very much for joining us on the channel, and talk to you next week, same time, same place. Goodbye.